At $2.3 trillion, Apple's market capitalization is larger than 96% of entire countries' GDPs. A list that includes Italy, Brazil, Canada, and Russia. If Microsoft was a country, it would be the 10th richest country in the world. The United States is responsible for the largest cumulative share of emissions in history. Tech, as a sector, is responsible for about 3% of CO2 emissions, a share that is larger than aviation's and is set to increase significantly as new, more carbon-intensive technologies come online, notably artificial intelligence. We are a sector that the world looks to and mimics. How will we lead through this moment? It's a terrifying moment for us because our sector is really great at building shiny new things and really terrible at fixing big systemic problems. As of last year, we crossed 6 of our 9 planetary boundaries. Think of the planetary boundaries as vital signs. If your liver, lungs, heart, and brain were failing, it would be cause for concern. The window is closing. We are going to need nothing short of a miracle or perhaps a revolution. Let's imagine that the problem that we were trying to solve was a business problem. Our goal as a business was trying to save the world, save the planet, and save humanity. I, as your investor, would say, well, you're a business underwater, figuratively today, literally tomorrow. Unfortunately, you're going to need to change some things. So for this exercise, I'm going to ask you to be the team, and I'll play the investor, which is what I do. And I think you should be the team because you have equity in this business, just by virtue of being humans alive in 2024. What I'd like to do is give you a few areas of improvement so that we can get this business going. First thing is, move fast and break things. I know, it's an oldie but a goodie. Our adaptation and resilience game is rather weak at the moment. So, all right, team, and that's how I'll be referring to you from now on, team, we're going to do things a little differently. To fix something that is broken, we need to look at ways in which we have failed in the past. That when I was in New York City in 2012 and Hurricane Sandy hit, we were blindsided when in complete darkness. We had no tools and no resources to deal with what had happened. I had fled Nigeria many years earlier with my family, and I had moved to the United States. And it was the first time since I had been in this country where I felt the vulnerability of our advanced technology in the face of natural disaster. Phone lines were down, cell towers were down. We were plunged into a kind of darkness that we did not know how to pull ourselves out from. Some of us were deeper in it than others. At the time, I worked for an impact investor, and I suggested that we try to put some ideas together on how tech could be useful during this event. So I reached out to a few people, and we came up with the idea, a piece of technology that would solve what essentially was a logistics problem without the ability to have typical logistics infrastructure. The problem was there were people out in the margins, out in Far Rockaway in multi-story buildings who were trapped. Elevators were not working, and communication was not working. There were people in Red Hook who had no heating, no electricity, and were flooded. There were aid networks on the ground who could not reach the people that they needed to reach. Using open APIs, mapping APIs, and mesh network providers to cobble together a system that would allow the people on the ground to find the people that they needed to find. First, I had to convince my friends and volunteers from the tech industry to come in and help during this. That was hard, to get people to take a few days off their Google jobs or insert FANG company. But I was surprised how slow we worked. We are, after all, the move and break fast people. The challenge there continued. We were so slow, in fact, that we were not able to build and deploy the technology that we were trying to deploy in the time that we had. In a couple of weeks, analog solutions came in, disaster relief professionals came in and filled the gap. I filed that project away in my mind, Operation Sandy, as a failure. But it stuck with me. I couldn't get it out of my head. What happened? How did we go wrong? Why were we so slow? I came up with a few ideas after I spoke to people. First, we were dealing with something that was a freeze response that people typically deal with in a moment of disaster. But I didn't expect us to have to deal with that because we were, after all, not flooded and in the middle of the worst of the disaster. We were a few miles away, which, incidentally, aligns with the next problem. We were not close enough to the problem to truly understand it, and we were not engaged with the folks who were most impacted by the problem. The third most interesting thing, I think, is increasingly these large-scale disasters require coordination with public sector actors and folks in the community organizers. And this is something we are very uncomfortable with in tech. And as we move into the world that we're moving into, it's something we're going to have to become very, very good at. So team, that's the task here. Our muscle for building resilience with public sector actors and in community needs to improve. Second, you all need to understand the pain points, okay? But let's just refresh. What's our problem here? Our problem is literally mass extinction. It's not exactly the same as hailing a taxi. Tech got a hold of this space, of the climate space, as a problem space. We were like, yeah, we got this. You know, we do hard things all the time. We build hard stuff all day long. We are known for our optimism, for saying that, you know, we bring happiness to all mankind through an app. So this optimism that we have has served us really well. I mean, let's face it, you can't pitch an investor by saying, we're screwed, can you write a check? It's all going to pot. Can you please fund my company? Even to hire people, good people for your company, you really need to have a story that suggests that there is a future. So here's the thing about optimism. I've come to think of it, dogged optimism, as an evolutionary mechanism that no longer serves its purpose. It's just like those fight or flight mechanisms that kick in sometimes when they're not supposed to. It's kind of like a nervous system reaction rather than the appropriate reaction to the scenario. So let me suggest something counterintuitive. We're dealing with a pain point that is quite literally death of the species. So there are moments when hope and optimism becomes an obstacle to flourishing. Bayo Akomolafe. I bring this up because I think it's an important way that we have to think about the work that we're doing. Pain is something nobody really wants to look at. But if you build products, the first thing you do is you go out there, you find out what your customer's pain point is. It is the way you build products that people will use, that will last. Yet, on this point, we are so reluctant to actually face the real pain point that we are up against. Here's how I learned what that really meant. I was in Louisiana about a year after Hurricane Ida hit, and I was introduced to a community group called Together in New Orleans doing a project called Community Lighthouse. Community Lighthouse came out of the Ida moment. I came in and I listened and I learned. What I heard was that the deaths after the storm were far more than the deaths during the storm. There were so many conditions in the aftermath of the storm, including lack of proper air conditioning, including power outages, and in the worst scenarios, people powering devices, all kinds of devices, medical devices, phones, using cars and electric generators, and then dying from the carbon monoxide poisoning. It was horrifying. They sat in this grief moment, these communities, and they grieved, many of them gathering together in their houses of worship, trying to figure out how to get through this moment. And then something phenomenal happened. so many of these communities came together. And I mean across the ideological and theological spectrum. They came in and they created this coalition, a very unlikely faith-based coalition. And inside that grief and in that pain, they built this thing called Community Lighthouse. Now, don't forget, Louisiana is a fossil fuel state. Last year, $47 billion of their revenue came from oil and gas. It is a very hard state to decarbonize. It also has a very large black population that is systemically exploited, survived Katrina, and can barely survive in that deadly cancer corridor that runs through the Gulf. But wow, were they determined. This group stood up one of the most impressive clusters of solar microgrids and resilience hubs this country has ever seen. That work has been expanded and continues today with the support of the federal administration. What struck me about what happened was how the grief moment turned into action. They did something that is very difficult to do, which is come out of that moment, create the conditions for collective action, and then move towards where they needed to go. So, team, we're going to have to figure out how to look this thing in the eye. Otherwise, we can't solve for it. 3, we typically think about unfair advantage as a positive in tech, something that a founder has that's unique to them, like a patent or, access to a community, something that cannot be replicated by anyone else. So that's how we think about it. And in this case, I urge you to think about the unfair advantage in a slightly different way. Think of it as, what if the best founder market fit for this climate crisis exists in communities that have so far been marginalized and not allowed access to the climate innovation world? And I mean Black, Indigenous, Global South originated people who have been canaries in the coal mine of climate change for decades, and their experience has taught them things that they can teach us. How do I know? They're my people. These are my people. I left my country because fossil fuels destroyed it. I will never forget standing in the driveway of our home, saying goodbye to my 9th grade best friend in the dry heat of a December afternoon in a little piece of tropical rainforest in southwest Nigeria. On the surface, our departure was the result of economic distress and a political climate that my family, members of a now reviled academic class, simply could not survive. But truly, Nigeria had become one of the world's largest producers of crude oil, and the entire fossil fuel industry owned our country. After we left, I had to witness the global spectacle of one of my activist heroes being sentenced to die and hung for the crime of defending his people, the Ogoni people, from the fossil fuel industry and the government that supported them. Just so Shell could continue to drill oil on their land. My life has been shaped by forces of extraction beyond my control. My story has been written by that. I broke in ways I did not even know I was breaking. And you are too. You are breaking no matter how far away you think you are from the site of the crisis, because the front line is coming closer and closer to you. Which is why it's important for us to consider the possibility that people who have lived this experience have something to offer us. So team, find you some of the folks with the genius from the front lines, because we need them. Remember that Hurricane Sandy story I told you? Scientists have been collecting data around the children who were in utero back then. And over the last 10 years, they have put together a study which they recently released that showed that in comparison to the children who were in utero and experienced Hurricane Sandy versus the children who were in utero at the same time but were not in the storm, the girls experienced a significant and different life than the ones who did not experience Sandy. Generalized anxiety disorder, depressive disorder, and the boys, increased risk to develop ADHD and increased risk to develop conduct disorder. We're going to need to do things differently if we're going to win. So team, let's keep building, let's keep innovating, let's keep doing the things that we're doing, but we're going to have to do them differently. We're going to have to lean in to the pain. We cannot look away. And we're going to have to do it together, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us feel. And we are going to have to look humbly to those who have something profound to teach us about this experience. Because I promise you, it will be a revelation and a revolution. The revolution we need and the revolution we deserve. Thank you.